Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Apply Leadership Podcast. My name is Blaine Smith, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and business partner, Brandon Young. We are two friends with one question, half an hour, and zero script. And this episode, we're going to take as a little bit of a part two to our previous episode, which was all about imposter syndrome. So if you haven't caught episode 43, go back and check that one out. I think we offered a lot of good things to think about as it relates to imposter syndrome and how we can reduce its effects. And today we wanted to talk a little bit about, what if we're actually behaving as an imposter? So it's one thing to, be good enough, smart enough, capable enough, qualified enough to do something, and we're being held back because there's a voice in our head suggesting that maybe we're not good enough. But what about those times in our lives, in our careers, where maybe we are kind of faking it? And how do we know when we're in one of those moments versus we're just having a kind of a genuine case of imposter syndrome? And this might be a fun exploration. It might get a little edgy at times, I guess, because it might get a little spicy. None of us like to think that we're in this position. And I think it's actually fairly comfortable, Brandon, for us to say, hey, I'm just having some imposter syndrome right now, because that's pretty common and acceptable.
Yeah.
And that implies that we are, in fact, good enough and rightfully in the place. We're just kind of struggling mentally to get over the hump. But it's a much harder conversation to have with ourselves, or certainly with others, to say, maybe I'm just not cut out for this, or maybe I'm just faking it. And I'm not really being true to myself. I don't really want to be here, or I'm putting on an act or a persona that it's just a jacket that doesn't fit anymore. Those are much harder conversations. And so, maybe for the next half hour, we'll dig into some of this deeper stuff and see what we think about some of that. So I'll send it over to you maybe and just kind of get your initial thoughts. What do you think about these situations where we're searching our soul a little bit and we discover I'm not just kind of having imposter syndrome. Maybe in this way, in this moment, I'm a bit of an imposter.
Yeah. I will start by saying that this isn't necessarily a topic that I am super stoked to talk about. So let me just throw that out there. Thank you for the question, dear friend and listener out there who has given us this question. But it's a tough one. And I have a lot of thoughts on this because we can go in a number of directions. I guess I'll take the first path, which I think is the easier path, candidly. Which is when you just said
you are not pumped to talk about this. I can tell.
I do not want to talk about this. But hell, why not? I'll just take the path of most resistance. Who am I kidding? Look, I'll take the wrench on this one. So, listen, how do you know if you're an imposter, if you have imposter syndrome? First and foremost, what is it that you are actually presenting to the world is what I would first start with. What are the things that you're saying? Are you sharing things that are patently false? Are they untrue? Are you sharing things that have a kernel of truth but have exaggeration into it, which I think, look, we're in the veteran community. Stolen valor is as old as warfare. As far as I'm concerned, people make up a lot of stuff. People exaggerate a lot of stuff. And I think if I'm being honest, the temptation to exaggerate as a veteran is very high. If I could just candidly put that out there, people see that I was a Ranger. They ask me these questions, and sometimes they ask like really, inappropriate questions. But sometimes they just kind of skirt around the issue. And I would say that why I think the temptation to exaggerate is very high in the veteran community, it's rooted in the fact that we are constantly measuring up one another. Everybody knows what unit is top priority, which units don't, which units have assessments and selections to get into, all of that kind of stuff. We're constantly comparing. We're comparing what's on our chests, what's on our uniforms. And look, there is function to that in a certain way, right? You want people to be getting after it, getting out there, all that kind of stuff. I get it. I understand why it's there, and I've participated in it both feet in, right? But I think that there's also, like, I think that it becomes unhelpful, right? In some contexts, like where it's helpful is when you see an aspirational vision of something that you want to be in a special operations unit. That's great. Strive for that, aim for that, go for it, all that kind of stuff. If it works out, great. If it doesn't work out, okay. But what you do with that, I think, then becomes what matters. And what I would say is that, where it's a competitive environment, everybody's looking at each other. I think we're also, the things that maybe inspired us to go into this kind of field, like, for me, like First Blood, when I was a kid watching Rambo and Commando and all that stuff, like what you learn when you're actually in that game is that's not actually true. Those are all just stories, they're all just movies and stuff like that. And where I think that people can get in trouble is when they don't decouple that from the reality that they actually lived, and feel like they have to live up to some kind of fantasy just because the person across from you in the conversation really wants to be having a beer with the fantasy instead of you.
Yeah. I think that is really where I come out on this is, do we understand the substance of what we're trying to do or who we're trying to be, or are we kind of operating against the idea of it or the fantasy of it in your mind? And I don't think this is in any way exclusive to the veteran community or to the special operations community. I think that's, in the United States, there is a bit of a fascination with the soft world. And so there are plenty of people who are trying to kind of reason by analogy, or, dress in a certain way to maybe imply. Or one of the things I see a lot is there's an intentional use of vague language about, people's military record and what units they served in, rather than being very specific about what unit they were in and what role they played. They might kind of offer a generality that you could read between the lines that they were like a super tier 1 operator, when really they were, a direct support person or something that is also very admirable. But they're kind of hoping that maybe you fill it in a bit more charitably. And I see plenty of that. And I don't fully know where that comes from. You and I have spoken off the mics many times about some of these cases where somebody with a very distinguished record and a lot to be proud of and plenty to stand on will then make a public statement or do something that is untrue and end up getting themselves in trouble. And I'm kind of scratching my head and like, wow, if that person just would have owned who they are and what they've done, that would have been more than enough for people to really admire them or to get good work or those kinds of things. And yet they had to take it a step or two too far and introduce some non-factual aspects or some embellishments to their story. And now they've gotten themselves in trouble. And that just seems like a bit of a shame. But to kind of go back to the original thought that I was offering is, do you understand who you're trying to be and what you're trying to do, or are you focused on the idea of it? Because I think when we really want to be an entrepreneur, we start doing the moves, as you would say, and we're not really doing the work. When we want to be an influencer, we start turning on our camera or our phone and we're pretending to be happy, or we're pretending to be super fit, or we're pretending to be a nutrition expert, one of many reasons why I no longer have any social media on my phone is because I started to become quite sad seeing all of the people working so hard to basically just recreate memes and skits and things that other people have already created in the pure hope of just getting attention. And it really made me sad when I started to see some people that I know. And I'm like, I know that person. That's not who that person is. Why are they pretending to be so bubbly or this or that? And they're just kind of basically putting on an act, because that is very similar to another person who is very successful or famous. And I'm not trying to be hard on people. That's not really my hope, because I know I've caught myself doing that too. If I go back and look at social media posts that I made throughout the last 15 years, I'm sure there are plenty of them that were really purely just to signal something, to get some attention, or to imply that I was credible or cooler than I am, and those kinds of things, which is why I'm kind of opting out of that game altogether. But in every case, it was because I had been distracted from the work. The number one piece of advice I give to every aspiring Green Beret is you need to learn as much as you can about that job and what those people do in real life. And if you love that and you just can't live without it, you're going to be just fine. But if you just like the idea, or you want all the kind of accoutrement of being a Green Beret, the beard and the hat and the whatever, it's not going to sustain you. And so that's what I always keep coming back to, is I find that when any of us are behaving like an imposter, especially me, it's because I'm operating against the idea of something that I want to portray or project. And I've lost the plot on the work and the substance of who I'm really trying to be and what I'm really trying to do. And maybe I'll let you jump in here, but there are ways that I'm actively trying to keep myself rooted in who I'm trying to be and for whom and for what. But it's certainly a lot easier said than done.
Yeah. You mentioned something in there that I think is fertile soil for these kind of behaviors, this imposter behavior, this persona projection, which is attention seeking, the need for attention. And we are in an environment right now where we have this loneliness epidemic in the United States. There's a lot of isolation. Obviously, things like social media can really encourage it. I think the hope was that it would connect us all more deeply and more regularly, but in reality, it seems to be dividing us all, or dividing many of us very deeply and very harmfully, I would say. But I think that, asking yourself the question of, do I feel lonely right now? Do I feel unseen? Do I feel like I could just use a little bit of attention? Maybe ask yourself that question. I mean, because I certainly can tell you that, loneliness, I have an amazing life. I have, an amazing wife, and I have great kids. I've got incredible friends. And yes, there are times that I feel lonely. Especially with my wife, who's working on her doctorate in nurse practitioning. She's very busy right now, and we're empty nesters. And so there are times that you can feel lonely. My only point in saying all of that is maybe ask yourself, like, what's the soil by which your heart is operating from right now? Do you feel a sense of being overlooked? Do you feel a sense that you have to prove something to somebody, maybe to yourself? Do you feel a sense of loneliness? Do you feel the need for attention? All of these things, maybe those are good questions that we can ask ourselves. And, I think that to prevent from going down these roads of trying to perpetrate a fraud is to, maybe reach out and ask somebody in your life that cares about you. Hey, can we just, can we just have some time together? Because I'm not feeling super great about it. And maybe that will reduce the amount of need for attention and attention seeking in a way that then actually baits you into being an imposter, or it baits you into these like stolen valor kind of, conversations. Because the fact of the matter is, and I'm going to go back to this again because I've seen it, and I literally just had an example of this, and I'm going to actually share it. So the point that I'm coming back to is, with the fascination of military special operations that we experience in America, which, by the way, it's for the most part a great blessing. The American people have been very good to us, the military, the veterans, and I certainly wouldn't be where I am today without that sea of compassion that has flowed over me. But I think that there are also circumstances by which people they just want to kind of sit with the fantasy. They just want to sit with the hero. They don't really want to sit with an actual person. I played golf last Friday with a friend of ours, John. This guy happens to be a West Point graduate, former 2nd Battalion Ranger, jumped into Rio Hato drop zone in Panama, Operation Just Cause. The dude is amazing. He's an incredible human being. And this guy sits down next to us after we were having a beer after the round, and he says, he was quite rude person. I'll just say this right now. And he says, how do you guys know each other? John and I are about 15 years apart. He's like, oh, we both served in the military. Oh, well, did you do anything? That's what he says. Did you do anything? And, John and I just kind of looked at each other, and we're just like, oh, John's a very kind guy. He says, oh, I did a couple things. He says, did you go to Vietnam? And John's like, no, I'm not that old. He
First
said,
of all, I'm offended. How old do you think I am?
Yeah, exactly. He said, did you go to Vietnam? And he said, oh, no, he's like, no, I'm, quite a bit younger. He says, oh, so you didn't do anything. And it's like, I'm telling this joke and everything like that. But you're really not. And this is an example of just a complete asshole, who just interrupts two friends having, a peaceful kind of experience. But it's not far off from what happens out there. There are different degrees of this. If I were to say, what is this? This is probably like an 8 out of 10 on the scale of like, what an asshole. Like, who would even ask such a thing and present in such a way? But there are degrees of this that happen out there that I would say, encourage people to use those vagaries to mask what they feel is something that they didn't do or wasn't good enough, or wasn't sensational enough, or they just outright exaggerate, or they start to lie because, it's just not good enough. And now I'm trying to perform to meet your expectation. And that is all, I think, founded on some sand inside the heart, if you will, that is, that's pretty loose and unsettled in what you have done, regardless of what you've done. Now, I'm using this as a veteran example, and said I didn't want to talk about this, and this is why I didn't want to talk about this. But I'm using veterans in the military as an example because that is what I am most familiar with. And what I would just say is, though the temptation may be real, and though you may be experiencing an interaction with somebody who is really looking for the fantasy, my encouragement is allow them to go seek the fantasy out themselves. Why don't you just, tell them you should just go watch, some of these fantasy movies or whatnot. But more importantly, I think check your heart posture on who you are and what you did. And please, if you hear nothing else from this podcast, be who you are and be proud of what you did. I don't care what you did. Whatever you did, be who you are and own what you did and be proud of it, because you did something and it mattered. Especially if you served in the military, you raised your hand. My buddy John, same guy. He always says, I know what you were doing when you were 18 years old. Good for you, man. You raised your hand. You served your country. I don't really care what job, what branch, whatever. You put yourself out there to protect this idea, this country, the citizens, your people. Please just be proud of what you did.
Yeah, there are, I think, two dynamics at play in the story you just shared. And one of them, maybe the more acute dynamic, I think, is that this gentleman likely served in Vietnam, was not welcomed home, was not held up on a pedestal for his service in Vietnam.
Oh, and I got to stop you. This guy was 44 years old.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he was just a jerk.
Was he just drunk? That's crazy to me.
Yeah, he was just, I don't know if he was drunk. I mean, but he was just a jerk is really all it is.
I was trying to be charitable and
this is one of the things that I love about you is that you're just such a better person than me because you're trying to be super charitable. I'm like, bro, he was just a jerk. I'm just, man. Okay, you guys are really seeing the inside of our relationship here.
Yeah, here we go. So, anyway, so the first dynamic I was going to say is that oftentimes when people see someone else being given accolades for something that they feel like they have done or even done more than, it like is really unsettling to them. And so it's easy to want to kind of neg people for being rewarded for something that you were never acknowledged for. But the other one that I think still holds true, regardless of who this person was, the golf course, is we're all kind of in this race to the bottom right now with regard to, stacking ourselves up against others. And I suspect the reason that any of us can have a really wonderful career and have lots of accomplishments and still feel less than is that we're living in a world where we're just bombarded all the time by everyone sharing their super dupers with us. And we can feel like, well, maybe I've done some things, but I haven't done half as much as that person. I think that's going on all the time. And that's a real race to the bottom, of course, because we're never going to be amazing at everything. And even if we've done a lot of really impressive things, there'll be somebody else who, at least in one dimension of our life, is just, head and shoulders better than us. And it's going to, cause us a real hard time. And I think one thing to maybe remember is that you are a whole person with many facets of your life, and what you bring to the table is also multifaceted. And so, yeah, a person may be much better than you at a thing, but you are a whole person. And if you just say, well, that person's better than me at this, and that person's taller than me, and that person has better hair than me, and that person had more sales than me last year, and that person has a better car than me, like, my goodness. Like, you can just look around the internet and you'll find at least one person who you deem to be superior to you in every single facet of your life. And that can make you feel really less than. And I think that can cause us to really posture and behave like an imposter in many of these ways. And yet, if we were really to think about our lives and the people in our lives and the ones who we are the most impressed with, the people we admire the most, what is consistent across the board? Is it their height, their skill, their strength, their money? Of course it's not. The thing that we admire universally are people who are comfortable in their own skin.
That's exactly
people who are just who they are. They put you at ease and they give you permission to be who you are. Those are the people, whether they're a small town person, from where we grew up, or they're a general officer who always remembers everyone's name. I have met people across the spectrum of professional success, and they all fit that bill. The people who I really admire and I aspire to be like are people who are at peace with who they are. And, maybe we could talk about how we get there. I'm sure there are many different paths, but that, I think, is really what we're going for. And if you want to be impressive, or if you just want to perform well and be successful in stressful environments and not be an imposter, remembering who you are and knowing that's enough is plenty. We have a 9-year-old daughter who's very ambitious and loves to perform and is very, very hard on herself. And we remind her as often as we have the chance that we love her and God loves her, and she is perfect just the way she is, independent of how good her cartwheels are or what notes she can hit. And look, she doesn't listen. It's very hard to get that through to her, but we're hopeful that through consistency, that will be the baseline of her confidence. Because if she's trying to just, judge herself by how the world judges her, on these external factors, I just don't think you're ever going to get there. I do think you can find peace knowing that the people in your life love you and that God loves you. And you start from there. And sure, you can still strive to be good at math or a great singer or a ball player or a whatever. But if it's not rooted in that, people are going to see through it eventually. And you're always going to know. And it's just, we have to stop trying to compare ourselves to the best aspect of all the people on the internet, most of whom will never even meet.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of work. We got to do the work. It takes for some people, it just takes, a couple of good, authentic friends and family who love you. For some people, it might take more. Might take some, clinical help, might take a little bit of therapy, all that kind of stuff, which, I've done it all. And I think that if you're worried that you're an imposter as opposed to feeling imposter syndrome, maybe sit with yourself first and ask yourself some questions. Is what I'm projecting objectively accurate? Is it accurate? Is what I'm projecting out into the world? How do I feel with what I'm saying out there? God gave you a gut for a reason. If you're feeling icky with something that you're saying, you might want to walk away and interrogate that. You might want to ask why. Why do I feel that way? Why do I feel icky about this? I think that those are some things that you can do. Like, if you're trying to tell people how to, I don't know, do something that you don't even know how to do in the first place, yeah, you're probably an imposter. You probably should stop doing that. Do yourself a favor, stop giving diet advice if you have a bad diet and you're overweight. It's not credible. You lack credibility there. I think that those are simple questions to ask. Now, whether people, you do it or don't, that's kind of up to you. I would have to say that, I know the person who sent us this question. And the fact that they're asking this question is probably pretty indicative of the fact that you're probably not an imposter. If you have the self-awareness and the concern to even ask the question, it's probably a good key that you have enough people in your life that are rooting you on and saying, like, no, you're on the right track.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I would say the last piece is always go back to the for who and for what. We ask ourselves that same question all the time when we're trying to do anything in our business, and we get tempted all the time to do things where we might be able to generate a little more revenue, or we might be able to generate a little bit more influence or notoriety. I mean, we're like anybody else. We're trying to make a living and grow our business and get our book out to the world and all those things. And we are tempted regularly to try to do things that might accelerate that process. And we just have to say, like, why are we doing this? For who and for what? And are we doing this because of the idea of it or because of the substance of it? And I think being willing to take the slow road, the long road, really pays off a lot. And in a world with infinite information and all those things, you might be surprised how well you can do by being really credibly good at one little small thing and finding people who are willing to pay for it, and or not pay for it. Those people might be in your house or in your community, but what is it that Seth Godin always says? Be a relevant specific rather than a wandering generality. I think that's probably a nice thing for us all to remember.
Yeah, and I want to come back. You had mentioned one thing in the beginning that I just want to at least leave a thought on, because I do think that we really address some of the more uncomfortable aspects of this question. But the other one that you had mentioned at the beginning was, maybe you're in a role and it just kind of feels like the jacket doesn't fit, or maybe it just doesn't fit anymore. It fit at one point in time. I would just say, if you are committed to a mission, to a role by which you feel like it no longer inspires you, you have lost that love and feeling, so to speak, it does not make you an imposter. It probably just means that you are growing in different directions. And I think that that's okay. if you actually acknowledge it and you engage with it thoughtfully. So all that stated, that's a lot to chew on. Thanks for the question. Thanks for pushing us into a question that we don't generally want to talk about, just because it gets weird. Things get weird out there, but I appreciate the question. Keep them coming. If you have any other thoughts or questions that you would like to hear us chop up, please send an email to contact@appliedleadershippartners.com, and we will get to it, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Thanks a ton.